Maxwell Sterling walked through the courthouse halls like he owned them. People moved out of his way without thinking. At 45, he was the king of Boston's legal world. His record spoke for itself, more criminals behind bars than any other prosecutor in the city's history. Today was no different. He adjusted his red tie in the reflection of a window. His custom-made suit fit perfectly, giving him that powerful look that juries loved. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed short, professional but still stylish. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," called out a young clerk, practically bowing as Sterling passed by. Sterling nodded back with his practiced smile, the one that showed just enough teeth to seem friendly, but not enough to seem weak. That smile had been carefully perfected over the years, just like everything else about his public image. The news vans were already lined up outside. Sterling knew they were waiting for him. The Harrington case had made national headlines, and everyone wanted to see the famous prosecutor in action. Victor Harrington, a real estate big shot, had tricked thousands of ordinary people into investing in buildings that didn't exist. Old folks had lost their retirement savings. Working families had lost college funds for their kids. And Maxwell Sterling was going to be their hero, or so they thought. Before stepping outside, Sterling checked his phone one last time. A text message glowed on the screen. "Payment confirmed. Remember our deal." He deleted it instantly and slipped the phone into his pocket. The crowd erupted when Sterling pushed through the courthouse doors. Camera flashes popped like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. He raised his hands for quiet, and amazingly, they listened. "Today," he began, his voice deep and clear, "we start the process of getting justice for the hard-working people of this city." Mr. Harrington thought he was above the law. He thought his fancy friends would protect him. He was wrong. The crowd ate it up. Sterling spoke about justice and fairness with such passion that nobody would ever guess he'd taken $500,000 to make sure certain evidence never made it to court. Harrington would still go to jail. That was part of the deal, but not for nearly as long as he deserved. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you're planning to run for governor next year?" shouted a reporter from the back. Sterling gave his humble smile, the one he'd practiced in the mirror hundreds of times. "Right now, my only concern is justice for the victims of this terrible fraud." Later that evening, Sterling pulled his luxury car into the driveway of his beautiful home in the city's richest neighborhood. His wife, Diane, greeted him at the door with a glass of expensive whiskey. Their teenage son was at some fancy private school camp. Their daughter was studying at a university in Europe. The perfect family, at least in the photographs that hung on his office wall. "How'd it go today?" Diane asked, though her eyes showed she didn't really care. Their marriage had been mostly for show for years now. "The usual," Sterling replied, loosening his tie. "The public loves a good show, and I gave them one." He sat in his home office later that night, looking over case files. Not the Harrington case, that was already taken care of. He was studying his next targets. Some would go to jail because they were truly guilty. Some would go free because they paid him well. And some would go to jail despite being innocent because they were connected to a small town in Oregon that nobody had ever heard of. A town called Pinewood. Sterling closed the file and poured another drink. 15 years he'd been playing this game, building his reputation while secretly collecting money and power. 15 years of being Boston's hero while carefully hiding who he really was. He glanced at the safe hidden behind a painting on his wall. Inside were documents that could destroy him and destroy others too. His insurance policy, his protection. The hammer of justice, he muttered to himself, repeating the nickname the newspapers had given him. If they only knew the truth, justice was just a word to him, a tool to use when convenient. Tomorrow would be another day of pretending to be the city's savior. Another day of the perfect lie. Elena Castillo rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of cold coffee. The newsroom was nearly empty at 7 a.m., just how she liked it. 28 years old and already burning out, she sometimes wondered if investigative journalism was worth the long hours and small pay. That morning felt different, though. Strange. Someone had been in her office. Not obviously. Everything looked normal at first glance. But reporters develop a sixth sense about these things. Her chair was pushed in slightly more than she'd left it. Her pens were lined up too neatly. And there, in the center of her desk, sat a plain manila envelope with no markings, no address, no name. "What the heck?" she whispered, glancing around the empty office. She put on a pair of disposable gloves. "You don't work crime beat for 5 years without picking up some habits," and carefully opened the envelope. Papers spilled out, bank statements, property records, photographs, text message printouts. At first glance, they seemed random. Disconnected bits of information about different cases spanning 15 years. One name kept appearing though, Maxwell Sterling. "The hammer of justice himself," Elena muttered, spreading the documents across her desk. "What have you been up to?" Over the next 3 days, Elena barely left the office. She slept on the break room couch, ordered takeout, showered in the gym downstairs. The story emerging from those papers was bigger than anything she ever worked on. The bank statements showed regular deposits to offshore accounts tied to shell companies. The property records revealed vacation homes purchased through fake names. The text messages, those were the smoking gun. Conversations between Sterling and defendants, defense attorneys, even judges, clearly showing deals being made. Cases fixed, justice sold to the highest bidder. On the 4th day, her editor, Tom, called her into his office. "You look like hell," he said, closing the door behind her. "Thanks, you're looking pretty today too." Elena dropped a thick folder on his desk. "I need to run a story." Tom flipped through the pages, his face growing more serious with each turn. "Jesus Christ, Elena. This is Maxwell Sterling, the city's golden boy. The next governor, according to some." He looked up at her. "If we're wrong, he'll bury this newspaper and salt the earth afterward. We're not wrong." Elena pointed to specific documents. 3 different sources confirmed these accounts belonged to him. The text messages match records from the phone company. The photos place him with people he claimed under oath he never met. Tom leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "Who sent you this stuff?" "I don't know." Anonymous drop. "That's convenient for someone with a grudge." "The evidence speaks for itself, Tom. Sterling's been playing both sides for years, putting innocent people in jail, letting guilty ones walk, all while making millions and planning his run for higher office." Tom rubbed his face hard, like he was trying to wake himself from a bad dream. "You need more verification. Talk to former clients. Find someone who paid him who's willing to go on record." It took Elena 2 more weeks of sleepless nights and dangerous meetings in parking garages. She found 3 people willing to talk: a former drug dealer who'd paid Sterling to reduce charges, a businessman who'd bribed him to drop a fraud investigation, and a court clerk who'd seen Sterling changing evidence files. When she finally handed in her completed story, Tom read it in silence. "This will cause an earthquake," he said finally. "Good." Elena's voice was firm. "The system's broken if someone like Sterling can corrupt it for so long." 3 editors reviewed the story. The newspaper's lawyers spent days checking every detail. Finally, the decision was made. The headline ran on a Sunday, "Juris Diced for Sal, the double life of Maxwell Sterling." Elena stood outside a convenience store that morning, watching people grab copies of the paper, watching their faces as they read the front page. Shock, anger, disbelief. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Other reporters wanting comments. Anonymous calls with threats. And one text from a number she didn't recognize. "Thank you for your courage. There's more to find in Pinewood, Oregon." By evening, the story had gone national. Sterling's face was on every news channel. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs reading, "No one is ABOVGAHLO," and "JL STL lying now." The golden boy's shine was gone. The hammer of justice was about to feel the blow himself. And Elena knew this was just the beginning. Maxwell Sterling stared at the newspaper spread across his kitchen island. His own face stared back at him from the front page, alongside the damning headline. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. "They can't prove any of this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His wife Diane stood across from him, arms crossed, face like stone. "Can't they?" she asked. "Is it true, Max? All of it?" He couldn't meet her eyes. That was answer enough. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since 6 a.m. His lawyer, his friends, the mayor's office, reporters, Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted to know if Boston's most famous prosecutor was really the criminal mastermind the newspaper claimed. Maxwell's perfect world was crumbling fast, too fast to stop it. "I've called a press conference for noon," he said, finally looking up at his wife. "Will you stand with me?" The silence that followed seemed endless. Finally, Diane nodded once. Not out of loyalty, they both knew that was long gone, but for appearances. Always for appearances. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters and angry citizens by noon. People who once cheered Sterling now booed as he approached the microphones. Signs waved in the crowd, "Lo sig him UP" and "Sterling is fool's gold." Maxwell straightened his tie, put on his most sincere face, and stepped up to speak. "The allegations published by the Boston Herald are completely false," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "This is clearly a coordinated attack by criminals I've successfully prosecuted over my career. My record speaks for itself. I have dedicated my life to justice and—" "What about the offshore accounts?" a reporter shouted. "Is it true you fixed the Davidson murder trial?" yelled another. The questions came like bullets, each one hitting a truth he couldn't defend. Diane stood beside him, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes were dead. Everyone could see it. Maxwell cut the press conference short after 10 painful minutes. As he retreated back up the steps, a young man broke through security and got close enough to spit at his feet. "My brother is in prison because of you. He was innocent." Police officers dragged the man away. Maxwell hurried inside, the perfect image now completely shattered. By evening, Maxwell's political allies had all released statements expressing concern and calling for a thorough investigation. The same people who had attended his fundraisers, who had laughed at his jokes and promised support for his future campaigns, now couldn't distance themselves fast enough. "Cowards," he muttered, pouring himself a third whiskey as he watched their statements on the news. His phone rang again. His lawyer, Richard. "It's not good, Max," Richard said without greeting. "FBI got warrants. They're coming to your office tomorrow. The Bar Association is already meeting about emergency suspension." Maxwell closed his eyes. How much do they know? Everything, it seems. Someone kept very detailed records. Dates, amounts, names. This wasn't just a lucky break for that reporter. Someone's been building a case against you for years. The doorbell rang. Maxwell looked out the window and saw news vans parked up and down his street. The perfect house in the perfect neighborhood now felt like a prison. Diane appeared in the doorway. "I'm taking the kids to my sister's. We won't be back tonight." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Pack what you need. My lawyer will contact you about the rest." She didn't wait for a response. 3 days later, Maxwell sat alone in his home office, surrounded by empty liquor bottles. The TV played in the background. They were talking about him again. Administrative leave pending investigation. FBI had removed 16 boxes of evidence. Former clients were coming forward with new accusations daily. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "They're looking into Pinewood." Maxwell's blood ran cold. He grabbed his laptop and began deleting files frantically. Pinewood couldn't come out. Not now. Not ever. The doorbell rang again. This time, when he looked out, he saw 2 FBI agents standing on his porch. "Mr. Sterling, we have some additional questions about cases involving individuals from Pinewood, Oregon." Maxwell's carefully constructed life wasn't just falling apart, it was being methodically dismantled, piece by piece. And the worst was yet to come. Agent Raymond Chen spread the case files across the conference table. 3 weeks into the Sterling investigation, and something didn't add up. "Look at these 7 cases," he said, pointing to separate folders. "They don't fit the pattern." His partner, Agent Lisa Wan, leaned over to examine them. "What do you mean?" "In every other case where Sterling took bribes, he either reduced charges or made evidence disappear. But these 7, he went after these defendants like a man possessed. Maximum sentences, no deals, and the crimes were nowhere near as serious as the punishment." Lisa picked up one of the files. Thomas Bryant, sentenced to 12 years for tax evasion on a small construction business. That's extreme. Exactly. Raymond opened his laptop. And I found something else. Every one of these defendants has some connection to a small town in Oregon called Pinewood. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Pinewood? Never heard of it. Neither had I. It's tiny logging town, population under 2,000. Bryant grew up there. Another defendant owned property there. Another had family there. Coincidence? Raymond shook his head. I don't think so. Sterling was obsessed with these cases. Look at his notes, pages and pages of personal research. Phone records show he called each of these defendants directly before their arrests. He never does that. So what's the connection to Sterling? That's just it, there isn't one. Not in any official record. Sterling was born in Connecticut, went to school in New York, moved to Boston 15 years ago. No mention of Oregon anywhere. Lisa tapped her pen against the table. He's hiding something. Elena Castillo couldn't sleep. The Sterling story had exploded beyond anything she'd expected. National news, talk shows, phone calls from publishers wanting book deals. But that text message about Pinewood kept bothering her. At 2 a.m., she finally gave up on sleep and opened her laptop. She started searching public records for any connection between Maxwell Sterling and Pinewood, Oregon. Nothing. She tried variations of his name. Different spellings. Still nothing. Then she had a thought. What if Sterling wasn't his real name? She opened the Pinewood High School website and started looking through their digital yearbook archives. Hours passed as she scrolled through faces of teenagers from 25 years ago. Nothing seemed to. Wait, she stopped on a face. A teenage boy with the same distinctive cleft chin as Sterling. Different hair, different name, but the same eyes. Michael Stenson, according to the caption. Senior class president, debate team captain. Got you, Elena whispered. The next morning, Agent Chen received an email from Elena with the yearbook photo attached. Is this your guy? Her message asked. Raymond stared at the screen. The resemblance was unmistakable. He changed his name, he told Lisa. He's been hiding his connection to Pinewood this whole time. But why? Lisa wondered. And why target people from there? Raymond picked up his phone. Let's find out. I'm calling the Pinewood Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Dale Thompson had been with the Pinewood Department for over 30 years. When Raymond called asking about Michael Stenson, the line went quiet for several seconds. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time, the sheriff finally said. Bad business, that whole thing. The town still doesn't like to talk about it. What whole thing? Raymond pressed. The fire, the Stenson family. Mother, father, little sister, all killed. Only Michael survived, just before his high school graduation too. Raymond felt the hair on his neck stand up. Was it an accident? Another long pause. It was ruled as one. Initially. Then we found evidence suggesting otherwise. Accelerants. Tampered smoke detectors. Michael was the main suspect, but... The sheriff's voice trailed off. But what? Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their statements. The case fell apart. 6 months later, Michael vanished. Nobody's heard from him since. Raymond exchanged looks with Lisa. Until now, he said. That evening, Elena stepped off a small plane at the nearest airport to Pinewood. The town was a 3-hour drive through mountain roads. As she collected her rental car keys, her phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. Be careful. The truth about Sterling is darker than you think. Not everyone in Pinewood wants it found. Elena looked up at the mountains in the distance, dark clouds gathering above them. Something told her this story was far more dangerous than she'd realized. But she had to know. Why had Michael Stenson become Maxwell Sterling? And why had he spent 15 years systematically putting people from his hometown behind bars? Fog hung thick in the valleys as Elena drove into Pinewood. The town looked frozen in time, faded storefronts, a single traffic light, and the giant lumber mill that had once been the heart of the local economy. Now the mill stood quiet, most of its windows broken. She parked outside the only diner in town. A bell jingled as she entered, and every head turned to look at her. Conversation stopped. The only sound was an old country song playing softly from a radio behind the counter. Coffee, please, Elena said to the gray-haired woman at the register. You're not from around here, the woman said. Not a question. Just passing through. Elena had learned that small towns didn't warm up to reporters right away. "Nice place you have." The woman snorted. "Used to be. Before the mill closed." She poured the coffee and slid it across the counter. "What brings you to Pinewood?" "Nobody comes here without a reason." Elena sipped her coffee, buying time to think. "I'm researching some local history for a book." "What kind of history?" "I'm interested in families who lived here in the 90s, the Stensons in particular." The diner went completely silent. Even the radio seemed to fade out. The woman's face hardened. "We don't talk about that family here," she said quietly. "Bad memories. Bad business all around." "I understand," Elena said, though she didn't. "Not yet. Is there anyone who might be willing to talk about them, for historical purposes?" The woman wiped her hands on her apron. "Try old Bill at the Historical Society. He keeps records of everything, but don't say I sent you." The Historical Society was a small building that had once been someone's house. Inside, dusty displays showed logging equipment, black and white photos of timber crews, and newspaper clippings about the town's better days. Old Bill turned out to be a thin man with thick glasses and a cardigan despite the warm weather. His eyes lit up at the sight of a visitor. "Don't get many folks interested in history these days," he said, leading Elena to a back room filled with filing cabinets. "What can I help you find?" "I'm looking for information about the Stenson family, particularly Michael Stenson." Unlike at the diner, Bill didn't seem bothered by the name. "Ah, the fire. Terrible tragedy. I have newspaper clippings, photos, everything." He pulled open a drawer and removed a thick folder. "Michael was a bright boy. Would have gone far. Such a shame what happened." Elena carefully opened the folder. Inside were yearbook photos, newspaper articles about debate team victories, and then the fire. Front page news: "Local family perishes in house fire, SONSOLESUOVIVOR." The photos showed a charred house and a teenage boy wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the camera. Even in shock, she recognized those eyes, Maxwell Sterling's eyes. "What happened after the fire?" Elena asked, turning pages. Bill sighed. "That's where it gets complicated. At first, everyone thought it was a tragic accident. Then the investigation found strange things. Evidence of arson. Michael became a suspect." He pointed to another headline: "Arson SUSPCTED in STNSON fire." "But he was never charged." "No." The case fell apart. Evidence went missing from the police station. Witnesses who'd seen Michael buying gasoline suddenly remembered differently. Then Michael disappeared right after graduation. Most folks thought he'd run away from the guilt. Elena studied the photos carefully. "Bill, do you have records of who was sheriff back then, and the mayor?" Bill nodded and pulled another file. "Sheriff was Roy Wilson. Mayor was Frank Chambers. They ran this town for 20 years. Elena wrote down the names. "Are they still around?" "Wilson died 5 years ago. Heart attack on his fishing boat. Chambers moved to Florida after the mill closed. Left a lot of angry people behind when the town's economy collapsed." Elena flipped through more clippings and stopped on a photo that made her breath catch. It showed a group of men outside a building labeled Pinewood Businessmen's Club. In the center stood Mayor Chambers. Next to him was Sheriff Wilson, and on the edge of the group, half smiling, was a man Elena recognized from one of Sterling's case files, Thomas Bryant, the man who got 12 years for tax evasion. "Bill, do you know anything about this businessman's club?" Bill glanced at the photo and lowered his voice. "Nothing official, but folks said they ran more than just businesses. Gambling. Loans with steep interest. If you couldn't pay." He made a slashing motion across his throat. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "And the Stenson family? Any connection to them?" "Ronald Stenson, Michael's father, he worked at the bank. Handled their accounts. There were rumors he was in deep with them before the fire. Deeply in debt." The pieces were starting to fit together. Elena took out her phone to make notes and saw a new text message. "Check the insurance policy. Follow the money. Then run." Elena sat in her rental car outside the Historical Society, rain tapping on the roof. She had just spent hours going through old files and newspaper clippings. The picture was becoming clearer, but she still needed more. Her phone rang. Agent Chen. I found something you need to see, he said without greeting. Insurance records. Ronald Stenson took out a new life insurance policy 3 months before the fire. $2 million. Big money for a small-town banker in the 90s. Who got the money after the fire? Elena asked. That's the thing, most of it disappeared. Some went to Michael as the survivor, but over half went to a company called Pinewood Investments. Guess who owned that company? The Businessmen's Club. Bingo. Mayor Chambers and Sheriff Wilson were both on the board. Elena tapped her fingers against the steering wheel. So that's why they wanted to pin the fire on Michael. If he was convicted of killing his family, he couldn't collect the insurance. And when the case against him fell apart, they still got most of the money anyway. Chen paused. There's something else. Sterling's been under house arrest since last week, but he's agreed to talk to you. Only you. Elena nearly dropped her phone. Me? Why? He says you're the only one asking the right questions. The house that had once showcased Maxwell Sterling's success now looked neglected. The lawn needed cutting. Newspapers piled up on the porch. An ankle monitor blinking on his leg, Sterling met Elena in his study, surrounded by law books and framed awards that now seemed like cruel jokes. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his own. He looked thinner, older, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. I've been following your investigation into Pinewood. How? Elena asked, keeping her tape recorder in plain sight. I have sources. Sterling smiled without humor. Old habits die hard. Why did you want to see me? Sterling leaned forward. Because you're getting close to the truth, but you're missing the most important piece. You think I killed my family, don't you? That I set the fire, changed my name, and ran away. Elena didn't confirm or deny this. What's your version? Sterling walked to his desk and removed a small key from his watch. He unlocked a hidden drawer and pulled out an old VHS tape. This is security footage from the Gas and Go in Pinewood, the night of the fire. He held it carefully, like it might crumble in his hands. I've kept it for 25 years. What's on it? The truth. Sterling's voice had lost its courtroom confidence. My father buying gasoline in containers, 3 hours before our house burned down. Elena felt a chill. Your father started the fire? He was planning to. Sterling set the tape on the coffee table between them. He was in debt to the Businessmen's Club. Gambling. Bad investments. He'd taken out the insurance policy as a way out. He was going to kill us all and make it look like an accident. But you survived. Because I found out what he was planning. I confronted him that night. We fought. He had already poured gasoline in parts of the house. During our struggle, a lamp got knocked over. The fire started faster than either of us expected. Sterling's eyes were far away now, seeing that night again. My father managed to get my mother and sister out as I escaped through my window. Then he went back in. Everyone thought he was trying to save something important. He wasn't. He was trying to destroy evidence of what he'd done. The roof collapsed on him. Elena was writing frantically. If that's true, why did you run? Why change your name? Because the Businessmen's Club needed a scapegoat. They wanted the insurance money. If my father was ruled to have committed arson and attempted murder, the policy would be void. So they framed me. When evidence started pointing to my father, things began disappearing from the police station. Witnesses were pressured to change their stories. So you ran. I survived, Sterling corrected. I became someone else. Built power and influence. And then I started hunting them down. Every person who helped frame me. Every member of that club who destroyed my family. The 7 cases that didn't fit your corruption pattern, Helena realized. Yes, those were personal. His face hardened. I became the very thing I hated, corrupt, manipulative, willing to bend the law, all to gain enough power to eventually bring them down. Why tell me this now? Sterling looked tired suddenly. Because I failed. I've lost everything anyway. And because there's one person left from the original conspiracy. The one who orchestrated all of it. Who? Frank Chambers. The former mayor. He's not in Florida. Sterling's eyes met hers. He's back in Pinewood. And if he knows you're asking questions, your life is in danger. The story broke like a thunderstorm across the nation. Elena's article revealed everything. the corrupt businessman of Pinewood, the insurance scheme, Sterling's father's plan, and the decades-long cover-up. Most shocking was the security tape footage, finally proving that Ronald Stenson had indeed planned to kill his family. Two of the men Sterling had sent to prison, Thomas Bryant and William Cooper, confessed when confronted with the new evidence. They admitted to being part of the conspiracy to frame young Michael Stenson. Their confessions confirmed Sterling's account and implicated Frank Chambers as the mastermind behind it all. The FBI launched a nationwide search for Chambers, who had disappeared from his Florida home 3 days before Elena's story was published. Meanwhile, Maxwell Sterling's legal fate remained uncertain. He sat in the visitor's room of the federal courthouse, waiting for his sentencing hearing. His lawyer had worked out a deal. In exchange for his cooperation in bringing down the Pinewood conspiracy, he would receive a reduced sentence for his years of corruption. Elena walked in and sat across from him. Notebooks and newspapers were tucked under her arm. "How does it feel?" she asked. "To finally have the truth out there?" Sterling looked different, calmer. The weight of his secret past had visibly lifted, even as he faced prison time. "Better than I expected," he said, "though I never planned for it to end this way." "How did you plan for it to end?" "I thought I'd eventually become powerful enough, maybe governor, maybe more, to bring them all down legally. Instead, I became what I hated most." He gestured at the newspapers under her arm. "What's the world saying about me?" Elena spread out the papers. Headlines ranged from "Sterling violain all time" to "Corrupt PROCCUTBGOers twisted road to revenge." "Public opinion is divided," she said. "Some see you as a victim driven to extreme measures. Others think your past doesn't excuse what you became." Sterling nodded. "They're both right." He leaned forward. "Any word on Chambers?" "Nothing yet. The FBI thinks he might have left the country." A guard appeared at the door. "Time for your hearing, Mr. Sterling." Elena gathered her things. "Good luck in there." "I don't need luck," Sterling said with a hint of his old confidence. "I've earned whatever comes next." The courtroom was packed. Sterling's wife Diane sat in the back, their children beside her. They hadn't abandoned him completely after all. News cameras waited outside, ready to capture the fate of Boston's fallen star prosecutor. Judge Patricia Reynolds, known for her fairness and tough sentences, looked down at Sterling from the bench. "Mr. Sterling, you stand before this court having pled guilty to numerous counts of corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Your actions have damaged public trust in our legal system." The courtroom was silent as she continued. "However, this court also recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of your past and your recent cooperation in bringing to justice individuals involved in serious crimes." Sterling stood straight, hands clasped in front of him. "I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, you will surrender your law license and forfeit all assets gained through illegal activities." The gavel fell with a decisive crack. As he was led away, Sterling caught Elena's eye in the crowd and gave a small nod of acceptance. 3 months later, Elena sat at her desk reviewing the final draft of her book about the Sterling case. Her phone rang. Agent Chen. "We got him," he said without preamble. "Chambers, arrested in Panama this morning. Will he talk?" "Already has, trying to cut a deal. He's confirming everything Sterling told you, plus more we didn't know. The conspiracy was even bigger than we thought." After they hung up, Elena added a note to her final chapter. Her editor had suggested ending the book with a meeting between Sterling and Victor Harrington, the wealthy real estate fraudster whose case had been Sterling's last before his own downfall. By coincidence or fate, they had been assigned to the same federal prison. According to guards who witnessed their first encounter in the prison yard, Harrington had asked Sterling the question everyone wanted answered. "Was my prosecution legitimate, or was I just another pawn in your game?" Sterling's response was simple. "You were guilty, Harrington. So was I. The difference is I'm finally facing it." Elena typed the final line of her book. In the end, Maxwell Sterling found the justice he had spent his life both serving and subverting, not in revenge, but in truth.